Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKenna. Delighted today to be joined by our special panel of 4 guests, with Christopher Bache tuning in via speakerphone. I'll be holding him up to the mic when it's his turn to speak, and that's why you're only going to be seeing 3 panelist guests on your screen. Today I'm very excited to be discussing this new book titled How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. Visionary and Indigenous Voices Speak Out. It's a collection of 26 essays by experts in different fields around the study of psychedelics. How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World explores the immense healing intelligence of nature, the wisdom of ancient indigenous prophecies and shamanic practices, the importance of the divine feminine for environmental regeneration, and the crucial role of psychedelics and entheogenic plants in initiating transformations of consciousness. Our 4 guests today, starting with Belinda Eriacho, who is of Diné or Navajo and Ashiwi, Pueblo of Zuni descent. Her maternal clan is One Who Walks Around, and she was born of the Zuni Pueblo people. She is the wisdom carrier, healer, and founder of Kalogi LLC, focused on cultural and traditional teaching and inner healing, and is an international speaker on various topics impacting Native American communities in the United States. Belinda is a board member of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, a program advisor for Naropa University, and a Native American traditional advisor for Sound Mind. If you'd like to learn more about Belinda Eriacho and her work, you can visit her website, which is kalogi.com, and I'll spell that KAALOGII.com. Our next panelist, who will be joining via speakerphone, is Christopher M. Bache, PhD, who is a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University in Youngstown, Ohio. He's also adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, emeritus fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and on the advisory council of Groff Legacy Training. He is also the author of 4 books, including his most recent, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven. If you'd like to learn more about Chris and his work, you can visit his website, which is www.chrisbache.com. Our next distinguished guest is Dr. Dennis McKenna, brother of Terence McKenna, who is a true psychedelic elder. Among his many engagements and accomplishments, he has conducted research in the ethnopharmacology for over 40 years, is a founding board member of the Hefter Research Institute, and was a key investigator of the Ayahuasca Project, the first biomedical investigation of ayahuasca. Since 2020, he has been working with colleagues to manifest a long-term dream, the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, dedicated to the study of plant medicines, consciousness, preservation of indigenous knowledge, and revisioning of humanity's relationship with nature. McKenna is author or co-author of 6 books and over 50 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. His website is mckenna.academy. And finally, our 4th guest, Stephen Gray, is an author, editor, and event organizer and speaker, and ceremony leader. He has been deeply involved with spiritual practices and sacramental or psychedelic medicine work for over 40 years, including Tibetan Buddhism, the Native American Church, and ayahuasca. Gray is the main organizer of the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. He's the author of Returning to Sacred World, a spiritual toolkit for the emerging reality, and Cannabis and Spirituality, an explorer's guide to an ancient plant spirit ally. Along with the other 26 contributors, Mr. Gray is both the editor and a contributor to this book, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. And his website, if you'd like to learn more about him and his work, is stephengrayvision.com. Banyan community, please join me in a warm welcome for all of our distinguished guests today. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So, Stephen, in the acknowledgments at the beginning of the book, you mentioned how instrumental Chris Bache was in this book becoming a reality. I'm wondering if you can just share with our audience a bit of the story about the genesis or the seed that sort of sparked this book to come into being.
Sure. Well, it's been coming for perhaps 50 years, for one thing, through all the medicine work and spiritual practices and study that I've been involved with in all these years. And I connected to Chris Bache. I can't remember how I first heard about him, but invited him to come and speak at our conference in 2018. And then again, and it was so amazing that I invited him back for 2019, and have just generally kept in touch with him. And when I was thinking about this book, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to proceed or not, actually. And I was having a phone conversation with Chris and told him that that was sort of where I was at, a little, not quite sure yet. And he said, well, Stephen, if you proceed with that, I will contribute at least a chapter. And that was the trigger for me. As soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, green light, no reverse gear anymore at this point, because Chris, to my mind, is a brilliantly insightful gentleman whose experience, as detailed in that book, is incredible.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Now we're going to go through, I've got some questions. Each one of our panelists today, just so our audience knows, contributed an essay to this wonderful book. And it really is fantastic. I highly recommend it to people. So Belinda, your essay is titled The Turning of the Soil. And you write at the start that your chapter provides a basic inner standing of the prophecy of the eagle and the condor. So I wonder if first you can clarify for people, what do you mean by that term, inner standing?
Inner standing really implies the innate knowing of our inner being, of who we are, and it's really heart-centered knowing. So when we do understand something, we actually have a heart connection to that space.
Beautiful. Thank you. And can you, for those who don't know, what is the prophecy of the eagle and the condor?
The prophecy of the eagle and the condor is a prophetic belief that is known among indigenous people of the Americas. In the book, I share the prophecy of the Hopi, which are located here in the state of Arizona, as well as the Andean traditions of Peru. The eagle represents the people of the north, or the people of the mind with technology, and the condor represents the people of the south, which are the people of the heart. And the prophecy talks about a great time of change and an awakening, which I believe this time period that we are in right now is that time frame. In our third dimensional reality, we don't have to look very far to see this. If we look around, we can see that in the breakdowns in our healthcare system and our political systems, as an example. It is also a reminder that if we don't change the behaviors that exist around us in our communities, then we will repeat history. There's that adage that if we don't change things, then history will repeat itself. But it's also the unification of humanity to set us. It's time to set aside our differences in order for humanity to heal, and that's really what the prophecy in the eagle of the condor speaks to.
And what role do you see psychedelics and plant medicines playing in this time?
It plays a big role, I believe. Plant medicines have been put on this earth for the healing of humanity. And many times that I have sat with the sacred plant medicines, this is something that these medicines have taught me. And it is a time that we also need to have reverence for these sacred plant medicines. I don't refer to them as drugs or entheogens. And so I believe that they do have a very important role in the healing of humanity at this point in time.
One of the things I really liked about your essay, there's a section titled "We are related," and you write about respect and reverence for all beings and how this needs to apply to the sacred plant medicines. I'm just going to share a little quote and then ask you a question. You write, "As I travel the world and speak on topics related to psychedelics, I find Western society has forgotten this interconnectedness, not only the interconnectedness between themselves and their external environment, but with their inner selves. Without this inner standing, we will continue to experience the over-commodification of these sacred plant medicines." So I'm wondering if you can talk a little about that over-commodification, and you also refer to this entitlement that is so prevalent in our Western society. And can you talk a little bit about the Indigenous and Native American teachings that help to address that?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. The entitlement really has to do with the accessibility of these sacred plant medicines. You know, for many of us that come from Indigenous communities and that come from BIPOC communities, which are the marginalized communities, it is very difficult for us to have access to these sacred plant medicines for the purpose of healing. So that's really what I was referring to in terms of the entitlement. For non-Indigenous people, it's very accessible to them. You know, they have the finances, they have the resources to access these medicines. And so that is really what I speak to in that, to that point. And then repeat what the second question was.
Well, the second part is really about, I guess I was interested in the treatment and the reverence for these plants and how one should approach them.
Sure. Sacred plant medicines and plants in general are really sacred sentient beings, and they need to have the reverence and respect paid to them for helping us heal as humanity. Not only just sacred plant medicines, but plants in general. And typically, you know, for many of the cultures, of the two cultures that I belong to, when we harvest plants for medicinal purposes, it's going out and actually holding prayer and respect and speaking to the plants as if it was a grandmother or a grandfather, and asking permission to take it. In return, we offer something back to the plant for allowing us to take it. And then even when we're in ceremony, whether it's natural plant medicines or synthetic medicines that are being utilized, say in a clinical setting or for research purposes, the same reverence and gratitude needs to be held for these sacred plant medicines, so that, you know, they can do the work that they were given to us for and created for. I know that a lot of times people have questions about, well, what's the difference between the natural medicines and the synthetic? When we really get down to the basic elements, they all come from the same elements. And so they have that same essence tied to them. And so it's really important that we look at how we're treating these medicines, because we want them to be around for not only this generation, but the next generations and the 7 generations to come, so that healing can happen in not only Indigenous communities, but all of our communities.
Right. When you talked about offering something back to the plant, that reminded me about, you mentioned the teachings around reciprocity. I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit about this concept of reciprocity and how we can apply that in the way we live our lives.
Yes, from the Andean teachings, there's a word called Aini, and Aini represents sacred reciprocity. And from what I understand, the meaning of this word is that today for me, tomorrow for you. And so there's always this sacred exchange back and forth. And Aini also involves a relationship between mankind, the earth, and the universe, everything that exists around us. And when we practice reciprocity, it's kind of that when we put something out there, it comes back to us. The other thing that I also wanted to point out, it also works in the same way with the businesses that are being created, that are creating synthetic sacred medicines. Those businesses and investors in those businesses really need to be mindful about also giving back to these communities who have been stewards of these medicines. And sometimes they struggle with that. What is it that we got to give back to them? And I think building a relationship is really key to finding what those answers are. So that's really what I was referring to in terms of sacred reciprocity. And sacred reciprocity can come in a myriad of forms. It could be in the form of sacred activism, advocating and being a good ally for Indigenous people. And I believe that's what Dennis does, and some of the work that he does. It's also being a good relative when it comes to advocating for, say, financial resources for mental health in our communities. It's about educating oneself of the social, ecological, and political issues that face Indigenous people that have been guardians of these sacred medicines. So those are some forms of reciprocity.
Thank you. And I just have one more question for you, Belinda. I wanted to ask you about the role that you see women playing going forward in the healing and transformation of our planet.
Mm-hmm. One of the points that I talk about in the book is about being the five-fingered people. We as humanity are the five-fingered people. In my culture, they talk about that. And being a five-fingered person, being human, we have the ability to access the heavens through the crown of our head. But we also have the ability to have our feet upon the earth so that we become that channel of those energies that move back and forth. And the role of women is much more important because as women, we are the creators. We are the creators of children. We are the creators of everything that exists, but we're also the nurturers. We are the ones that play a role in the healing of our communities. And, I don't know if you've seen this in the last few years, but every time, I see something happening at TV and different types of advocacy that's going on, it's the women that are the front line, the mothers, the grandmothers, the sisters, the aunties that are really out there advocating for the betterment of their communities. And so women do have a big responsibility and a role for Indigenous communities that come from matrilinear societies, like my two lineages are. It becomes much more important. And we have roles and clans in which those roles and responsibilities become even more heightened. For instance, in my Diné culture, I come from the Khanatni people, which is the one who walks around. And this is one of the four sacred clans of the Diné people. And the responsibility of Khanatni people are to be the healers. So it's our responsibility to learn the ceremonial ways and the traditions and continue to pass that down orally from one generation to the next. So that's an example of that.
Thank you so much, Belinda. And we look forward to having you weigh in again with some of the group discussion. And I'm going to now bring my speaker phone on my cell phone here up to the mic. Are you there, Chris?
I'm here.
Chris, your chapter, it's the leading chapter in the book, and it's called The Birth of the Human Future.
Future human.
Oh, sorry, The Birth of the Future Human. My bad. And can you explain to our audience, so they have a bit of context, about the 20-year psychedelic odyssey that you undertook from 79 to 99?
So let me just put this in a context. Mine has been an unusual life in that I haven't been involved in scientific research. I haven't been involved in deep collaborative projects. I basically have made my living as a teacher in a philosophy religious studies department. But my passion in life, in my personal life, was the systematic exploration of the deep limits of consciousness with psychedelics. And I happened to choose an unusually intense practice format, which gave me over 20 years an unusual trajectory. There's all of us, everyone in the conference are psychedelic or psychonauts in so many ways. And there's so many ways to cross the boundaries and so many ways to step through. And my way is just one more way of stepping through. And much to my surprise, a core theme of my work after about 5 years, this was about 30 years ago, was the transformation that humanity is undergoing. Humanity is coming into a time of profound tipping point transformation. It was like all the rivers of history were coming together and flowing into a single canyon. Before and after time, a change of history. And this caught me completely by surprise because at the time when this started, I was still thinking you do this psychedelic work for personal transformation. But this was tapping into a collective transformation, a collective story. And so that became part of my experience, stably over years. It kept coming back in. And it would be a long story to lay it out, but I lay it out in the book as best I can. Time became porous in my journey, as it does for many of us when we go into these deep journeys. Time became porous. I moved in and out of the future, in and out of what I came to call deep time. Experienced the evolution of humanity from a perspective of future time. And I know how strange this sounds to my scientifically trained colleagues, but to my psychedelic colleagues, I know that they understand these things because I don't think there's anything unique to my experience. It's just a particular person's experiencing of what many of us are experiencing, I think, when we move into deeper entry into the mind of our species, the mind of our planet. We feel this change that's welling up underneath us that we're coming into. And then as part of this, 5 years later, I had an experience, and I was ecologically naive. I mean, this is 30 years ago, right? I'm not, this is pre-climate change, pre-awareness of this sort, just professor of religious studies. I had this deep experience once of what I can only describe as thinking into the mind of our species, into the heart and mind of our species, billions of people, and experiencing a cataclysmic collapse of our society, of our culture, of our way of life, just a loss of control, an implosion, reaching critical mass, and then we make the transition through. And when we made the transition through, at least from my visionary experience, we had been profoundly changed by the crisis that we had just endured. Something about this crisis changed us, the way we were drawn to respond to it so deeply. It changed us. It unleashed something profoundly good in us that propelled us into the future human. The next, which I believe is, again, many people having this experience, they give it by different names. So it's just the idea that humanity is coming to the next human, the next iteration of human intelligence, a deeper spiritualization, a soul manifestation of human evolution. And I think that's one of the other things given me was an understanding that reincarnation is coming to a combustion point. There's an acceleration taking place that I think there's some type of super integration of our former lives, which is taking place at the soul level. And just as the world is trying to become one critically, we are trying to become one. And I think in this process, we are giving birth not only into a new culture outside of us, but a new identity of humanity, a soul identity. I think the soul is waking up in history. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's not my story, it's just what was poured into me, and that's all I have to offer, is what was given me, for whatever it's worth.
It's one of those things that, even though I haven't directly experienced that, it's something about it that resonates on a deeply human level, I think. I'm wondering, one of the things you say, I'm just going to share a quote, Chris, and then I've got a question for you. You say that sharing one's visionary experiences is a tricky business. However meaningful my psychedelic experiences are to me, they are naturally less meaningful to others. I hope my experiences will speak to you, but whether they do or not will largely depend on two things. The first is whether you trust the potential of psychedelic states to yield true insights into our universe. And the other is whether my experiences are mirrored in the experiences of other psychedelic explorers. So I'm wondering, you kind of hinted that maybe there have been other psychedelic explorers that have had similar experiences. Can you comment on how often this kind of experience or insight is come upon by other explorers?
I can share my personal impressions, but that's just personal impressions. What would be more important is that maybe at a conference or two, we begin to really kind of do some poll taking of people there. But when I talk about these things to groups, I have many people who come up to me and say, yes, I've experienced this too. Not quite like you did, but I've experienced this coming to a turning point, this accelerating taking place. So that happens enough. And it seems to me that I think we're experiencing kind of something along the lines of an archetypal shift, a deep trans shift. And I think many people have this experience. They bump up against it in different ways. There are contemplatives, indigenous peoples, non-psychedelic peoples who see the significance of the time that we are entering. So I think in my experience, I'm just bumping up into something that's registering in all sorts of people's lives all over the place. But wouldn't it be nice to have a more detailed assessment of how true that may be?
Indeed.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me was your description of when you, in your visions, when you actually went into this experience of the future human, the sort of the feeling that you got from that society. Can you describe for our audience a bit about your experience of what the the future human looked like? It felt like, what was that like?
I'll do my best. It's not a vision, it's a being tuned. It's entering into the experience of the underlying blueprint of it. So that's what I mean by the archetype of it. It's going into future time and experiencing the underlying condition of the human form in that future aggregate time. And this being was so beautiful, so extraordinarily beautiful. Heart, all our wounds, all the wounds of history, all the human wounds, all the terrible things we've done to each other, all of it healed. The heart completely healed. The mind radically open, and able to enter into and maintain conscious communion with higher, deeper forms of consciousness in the universe, all sorts of open channels open. It was what we have seen or believed or been shown in Christ as the firstborn of the future, of the Buddha, the awakened one, of the prophet. These are visions of an awakened soul. And I think what's happening, it's for all of us. Just touching it. I've only been immersed in it maybe 5-6 times 3 times deeply. And honestly, life-changing. It makes everything make so much sense. It was the capstone of years and years of experiencing the reincarnation cycles and cycles and episodes and the evolutionary trajectory of human culture. And to sort of see that all of this has these deeper underlying currents, which are now, I think we're being very much in an underlying current of purification, clearing the past, dealing with the past, inheriting the karma of the past. But we're purifying those, and in the process giving birth to a new synthesis of time in the human species. Because if all our lives are integrated into a single consciousness, that means the time of that integrated being is massive. And so another way of thinking about what the future human is, it's a completely different way of being in the universe. It holds hundreds of thousands of years as its lifetime. And I think it's not just an awakening of the heart, an awakening of the mind, but our senses, our physical senses, are exponentially increased in sensitivity. And it's not because of the magic, it's just a theory that we have, that our senses are basically biochemically driven, the result of chemical and electrical impulses, whatnot. But the more consciousness, the stronger consciousness is in the body, the heightened and augmented one's senses become. And so I think the future human is not just an awakened human in all the deepest spiritual sense, and an awakened in the heart, and an embodied. I mean, it's not like reach enlightenment and leave, go to heaven. It's embodied in the body. All of this coming into. And the bliss is overwhelming. Just overwhelming. And so humbling.
Chris, final question for you. What, if any, did you get any indication in these journeys as to what role psychedelics have to play in moving towards this future human consciousness?
You know, I think about that, and it's not because there have been special messages given to me in my visionary work about psychedelics, but of course I'm accessing these experiences with psychedelics. I'm with a community of brothers and sisters from all sorts of different backgrounds who are entering into deeper states of awareness, deeper states, I think, of responsibility and engagement coming out of these experiences. And so since I believe the pressure is building and history is speeding up, and psychedelics are about the speeding up of the opening of consciousness to the deeper levels, surely it has some part to play in this crisis that we're coming into. It has a healing part to play. It can really help us heal the energies that's moving inside us. It has a spiritual awakening part to play. It can open us to our roots in this cosmic universe and our blessed part. And I think it can open us into the deep cosmic mystery. We can now have systematic access to levels of the universe that we could only dream of having access to 200 years ago. The ancient civilizations had it in pieces. We have this opportunity. We're stepping through. And so I think it's one of many. There's so many things that are pouring into the present, right? Women's movement, science, culmination, the internationalization, so many things are pouring into the present. I think psychedelics is just spice that seasons the stew.
I love it. The spice that's psychedelics is just the spice that seasons the stew. That's great. Well, Chris Bache, thank you. And please hold on the line. We'll bring you back in a little bit here. But thank you so much for sharing your insights. Dennis, you're the 11th chapter in the book, and it's called Beyond Measure, Reflections on Experienced Realities in an Awakening Universe. You provide a critique of scientific, rationalist, reductionist thinking, which you term in this naturism. And you speak to what you call the primacy of experience. Can you explain to our audience what you mean by this, the primacy of experience?
What I meant by the primacy of experience in that essay, which is basically that experience is all we have. You know, we are in the moment, and experience is our state of consciousness at any one time. You know, what the past is gone, the future hasn't happened yet. So we are in this really eternal present. And although we spend a great deal of time sort of trying to break out of that, the fact is, you know, that we depend on memories to construct our past, you know, and memories are always incomplete. Memories are a fantasy. They're a reconstruction of things that we have experienced, or that we think we've experienced, that we recall. The future hasn't happened yet, although we spend a great deal of time anticipating the future, imagining what it will be like, and in some ways living in the future in terms of our mindset. What this does is, in a certain sense, though, it decouples us from the moment, the present of our existence, which is really all there is. You know, if you think about it, we have just this experience of the moment, and I think it's important to recognize that in a certain way. And you know, I mean, Ram Dass said it in his book, "Be here now." You know, it's important to be here now, because being here now is really all we have. You know, and that's what I meant by the primacy of experience. And you know, it comes up in conversations about psychedelic experiences. You know, I just was recently at a conference in the UK that was on the topic of entities, you know, the sentient entities that you encounter in psychedelic states and other types of altered states. And, you know, one of the perpetual questions here is these entities which come to us as though they were outside intelligences, or you know, rather than being part of ourselves, some part of ourselves that we experience as not ourselves. And it doesn't really matter. I think those questions are very hard to answer. But the question that perpetually comes up is, are these things real? Are these intelligences real? Are these experiences you have real? Well, what I say is, anything you experience is real. It's real in the sense that it can be experienced. And then you can get into the weeds about, does it come from inside or outside? And what do those terms actually mean? You know, because one thing that psychedelics do teach us is that there is really, you know, it's all one. There really, these artificial boundaries between the self and the rest of the cosmos are part of the what is sometimes popularly called or now the current term is the default mode network. But it's part of this construction that our brain creates for itself, so that in order to make the world comprehensible. So the question about your experiences, anything you experience is real in that it can be experienced. Is it real in some sub-objective sense? That's a tougher question to answer. You know, I am reminded of what the famous UFO expert J. Allen Hynek responded when he was asked, well, you know, you've been researching UFOs for 20 years. Are UFOs real? And he said, well, I don't know if UFOs are real, but I'm 100% certain that UFO experiences are real. And I think that's an important distinction. And I think you could say much the same about the entities and the things that you encounter in psychedelic states. Yes, they're real, they're experienced. Are they objectively real? That's another question. Or do they come entirely from within the mind or the collective unconscious? That's another question. And another question about that is, does it matter? You have these experiences. Does it matter where it comes from? I think a more useful question to ask is the information useful? Are the insights that you derive from these altered experiences useful in some way? Does the information appear to be valid and influence the way that we, integrate that and move forward, perhaps in the way that we live our lives or the changes we make? So I think that's what I meant by that primacy of experience observation.
I want to share a quote and then ask you another question, Dennis. You write, speaking about science, you say this is the great power of science, its ability to correct its assumptions as additional data becomes available. While science has great explanatory power as a result of this self-correcting methodology, it is also prone to a certain arrogance. The assumption that we've, quote unquote, pretty much got this reality thing figured out often permeates and, in my opinion, cripples the scientific endeavor. Can we talk a little bit about this assumption that you see in science and how psychedelics, how plant medicines or sacraments can play a part in addressing our human arrogance, or the arrogance found in scientific communities, some scientific communities?
Sure. So science is, by definition, it's reductionist, right? It looks to explain what it studies, phenomena in nature, basically, with the most facile, it's the whole applications of Occam's razor. The idea that the data that explains the phenomenon doesn't have to be elaborated on. If a simple understanding will do, you don't have to elaborate on that. So by definition, science operates within this framework of reductions. But the universe is not reductionist, and our experience of the universe isn't really reductionist. There's much more to experience. Just this subjective experience that we were talking about, this experience of being in the moment. We are programmed to suppress the background, to bring the foreground forward, to focus on what's right in front of us, essentially. But there are important things going on in the background, but science doesn't pay attention to those unless forced to. And in general, we as westernized, intellectualized, literate, people, by the very nature of the fact that we are literate, we also have been programmed to suppress the background. This happens much less for indigenous people, and I would venture to say also for children. They are much more open to a sort of holistic understanding of this moment of experience, and that we're all suspended in at all times. But ours is Western, scientifically educated, generally educated people in some ways experienced a kind of an impoverished view because of this training, this habit that has been acquired to suppress what's going on in the background. And I think one of the big advantages, one of the things that psychedelics can help us learn, is to bring the background forward and pay attention to what's going on in the background, because just because you're ignoring it doesn't mean it's not important. And I think we're now seeing that science, psychedelics can in some ways be even a tool for scientific discovery, a lens through which you could look at the world and perceive things about it that you're normally not aware of, so it opens the mind in that sense. It can actually be you know, a much more holistic learning tool. It's not really used in that way, but if we look at various instances where scientists and other people have actually gained insights about nature as a result of their psychedelic experiences, such as Carey Mullis, his discoveries about the polymerase chain reaction, for which he won the Nobel Prize. I mean, he freely admits that it was his experiences on LSD and his ability to get down among the molecules, as he put it, and understand these processes. So psychedelics can be an important lens, essentially, for apprehending the world that we don't make use of. And then I think the other aspect of this is that, science tends toward arrogance and sort of the, a tendency to think that we have it all figured out. I think psychedelics emphatically and dramatically show us that we only understand a very tiny slice of reality. What the part of reality that science studies is a small part of the total, and it may understand it in very great detail, and it may, I mean, it's useful in that sense. It's useful at looking at processes in very great detail and kind of sussing out how they work, but it does so at the expense of a vast realm of potential knowing that we just don't deal with. It's that is not known to us. And I think one of the lessons that comes from psychedelics is this reminder to be humble, to remember how little we know, not how much we know. We know from the standpoint of humanity, we think we know a lot. From the standpoint of the universe, we know very, very little. And I think one of the big take-home lessons, at least for me, of psychedelics is remember how little you know. There's no place for arrogance here. There's a lot of room for humility, because if you acknowledge that, some people might say, well, we can never understand the universe. It's totally beyond us, That's okay. It's probably true. We never will get the full picture. That doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile to keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep expanding our understanding. I think also sometimes people who are not scientists, and even people who are scientists, kind of misunderstand that science, because of its very nature, asking questions, developing hypotheses, and then testing those against the available data, an issue is never settled in science. You never prove anything in science. You can only not disprove things. And there's always the potential for more data to come in as you learn more that will completely overturn your understanding, or at least radically force you to radically change it. That's how science progresses. It's one of the few human endeavors that's open to this idea of self-correction. If you don't accept, if you accept a set of principles that can't be tested, a set of suppositions about the cosmos that are not open to questioning, then you don't have science anymore. You have a religion, and with all due respect to religion, that's fine. But one of the things about religion is you have dogmas that are not questioned. You're supposed to accept them on faith. That's hard for scientists to do. because their whole intellectual stance is to develop ideas and then basically try like hell to demolish your theories. That's how it should proceed. That's not always how it does proceed in this age of big science. And science is ideally it's the search for truth, but in the contemporary world, many other considerations go into the practice of science. So,
thank you so much. Now, I want to ask Stephen a question, and then we'll open it up to a few audience questions. I'm just watching our time here. So, Stephen, the second chapter of the book, you with other contributors give an outline of the great medicines, as you call them. And I was interested reading about each of them. Surprisingly, the one that caught my attention, and I know this is a topic you've written another book on, was cannabis. And you tell us that it is not technically considered a psychedelic, but that, quotes, when understood and used skillfully, cannabis deserves the label. Can you explain this for us and illuminate the power of cannabis as a medicine or a sacrament for peace, as you call it?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ross. And in case I don't get a chance to say anything later, I just want to thank Banyan and you and Jacob for putting this together, and the other three people that have preceded me here. It's just been wonderful to listen to the things that Belinda and Chris and Dennis have had to say about all this. Right. So, yes, technically, by some kind of science medical definition, cannabis is not a psychedelic, but the hypothesis here is that the word psychedelic from the Greek means soul or mind manifesting, and the other word often used for these substances is entheogens, and that's another word, or compound word from the Greek that means generating the divine within. And I believe when understood and used properly, optimally, cannabis has the potential to help people open into those states. It, for the most part, it doesn't have the same kind of otherworldly qualities, experiences that, places that people like Chris Bache have gone, for example. Dennis McKenna has told stories about looking down at the planet, and a voice says, "You monkeys down there think you're running things. You don't, right, Dennis?" Anyway, but cannabis is more, what Chris talked about. One of the things that he talked about in answering your questions, Ross, was that the future human it's about embodiment as well. It's a sort of a total holistic mind body integrated experience of oneself, and again, used properly. And this is really key, because I honestly, with all respect, I don't think most people do know this about cannabis, although it's changing, thank God, or goddess. But if you can quiet your mind enough, cannabis has these, what many people would consider remarkable effects of stimulating creative thinking or deepening you into particular experiences that Buddhists might call one-pointed meditation or form-based meditation, so to speak, which could be anything really. You could potentially get deeper into it. However, if you can quiet your mind enough, and that's a challenge for most of us, including myself, then the amplification effect that it has. Some psychedelics are sometimes referred to as non-specific or unspecific amplifiers. Cannabis is almost the definition of an unspecific or non-specific amplifier in my view, in the sense that if you can, as Dennis's brother Terence used to say about the psychedelics, if you sit down, shut up, and pay attention, which is almost the definition of meditation. It doesn't necessarily have to be sitting down, literally, but if you can calm your mind enough, to allow that amplification to effect to go to work, as it were. Cannabis can deepen you into the now moment. Dennis talked about that, the eternal now, or the be here now aspect of it. So the wisdom journey that we're on requires us to be enlightened, so to speak, in this body, right? As Chris said, it's not about checking out and to heaven, so to speak. It's how we embody the wisdom, the eternal wisdom, if you will, into this body. I think it was in my cannabis book, I quoted the mystic philosopher, poet, priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who said, physical energy must be mastered for spiritual energy to manifest, more or less those words. And so cannabis has that potential to allow us to open up the body system and the mind system in sync, so to speak, and allow us to deepen our connection into the present. Now, it may have otherworldly qualities as well in your experience, but it definitely has that potential.
Do you see any issues now that cannabis is legalized here in Canada and in many states in the United States? What's your take on that? Is that something that's going to be really good for society? Are there any warnings that you see in terms of it being overused or misused?
Gee, that's a tough question. And as Dennis says about the psychedelics, you're supposed to know less, not more. um, and so, and was it Plato that said the only thing I know is I don't know anything, So I don't actually know, but let me put it this way. I think that was already the case before legalization in the Western cultures, is that most people, I say most, qualified most, did not know about or practice or experience these deeper qualities that cannabis has the potential to open one up into. And that was the motivation behind the book, actually, was gathering people to speak about cannabis as a spiritual ally. So I don't actually know exactly what the effects of legalization are. Certainly, legalization has the effect of destigmatizing cannabis for a lot of people, and that's probably a good thing. As with the other psychedelics, commodification, is an issue as well. For example, I sometimes deal with an under the table grower, and he says most people want the couch lock, heavy duty, indica type cannabises, and that's where the market is. Whereas the kind of work that we're talking about here, I think it requires a more what would you say, spacious, uplifting, and almost airy kinds of strains. So the marketplace is determining the direction of that to a large degree. So it's just a matter of continuing with sharing ideas and educating, really, and hopefully people will get it and have these experiences. And that is happening. We have these wonderful cannabis ceremonies at our conference, and as part of the conference, and people almost uniformly go, wow, that was incredible. I had such a deep experience. And oftentimes they say they didn't even know that cannabis, you could have those kinds of experiences on cannabis. And people say, was that just cannabis, or did you mix something else in there? No, this is cannabis. It's a powerful, sacred medicine if you know how to work with it.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of you for sharing your wisdom, and a big thanks to our live audience for being so engaged and submitting your questions as well. So we're going to get to a few of those now. Okay, so there's a question from Sasha. It was a question about psychedelic assisted therapies. And I don't know the quote myself, but it was something from Dr. McKenna, something to do with patient abuse sometimes being necessary in the context of psychedelic therapy. And Sasha was just looking for a comment on that quote. I don't know if you know the quote that's being referred to, Dennis.
Actually, I don't. I don't think I have ever advocated that there was a place in psychedelic therapy for abuse of patients. If sometimes have said that ayahuasca can be a stern teacher, and it often presents in a feminine form, whether or not, but it's kind of like your wise grandmother, who has nothing but compassion and your best interests at heart. But if you need to be slapped upside the head, it will do that. I'm talking about the medicine, not the therapist. Sometimes the medicine can be very hard on you. I am not sure that I said if that there was a place for. Okay, some people. Yeah, I mean that's what I said. I said sometimes people got to get slapped upside the head. I don't say it's a bad thing. I'm talking about the medicine giving us the slap upside the head.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a little bit of a debate going on in the chat here, and it sounds like it's a misunderstanding about the context. You're talking about the medicine doing the slapping, not the therapist.
The medicine can give you a slap on the head. The therapist could, yeah. And I think I've seen she showed the post, so that's what it was in reference to. Yeah, that's what it was in reference to. Therapists. By and large, under most circumstances, they don't really have to, they shouldn't abuse their patients. Obviously, they don't even need to touch their patients, and I mean, some therapists may disagree, but given all the issues around that, that's probably a good guideline.
Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, there's a question from Tom. He mentions his preference for the term sacrament versus the word medicine. So do Belinda or any of the other panelists have thoughts on the differences between these terms? Maybe Belinda, if you want to weigh in first.
Yes, so there is a difference between medicine from our perspective as Indigenous people. Medicine to us can be life experiences. It could be plants that we utilize. Unfortunately, we live in a time, and when I say we, I'm referring to myself as a Native American and Indigenous person, where the legal definitions of religion and the use of the word sacrament comes in to that, which it does not accommodate Native American spirituality, beliefs, and values, practices, and it is really based on Euro-Christian values and norms. And, even in 2022, we still have to deal with those types of issues, even though we are original people of these lands. So I think it's more of the way that we use that word medicine versus ethnogens in the context. We're probably talking about the same thing. It's just a different viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my point of view, it's important to keep your eyes on the prize, as it were, and not get too hung up on particular words because they are interpreted so differently by everybody or so many different people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think these terminologies can be loosely applied, like the term psychedelic, which is a good term in some ways to describe these medicines or these substances, because it means mind manifesting, and they certainly manifest the mind, and they often manifest it in a variety of ways. So it's a vague term. I mean, yeah, it manifests the mind, not always in the way that you want it, but it's useful in that sense. I have a bit of a problem with both sacrament and entheogen. I think these two terms really depend on the context in which they're used. If they're used in a religious context, then maybe you can call them sacraments or entheogens. Entheogens meaning bringing out, manifesting the God within, but this has a religious context to it. which is fine in that context, but psychedelics don't have to be used in a religious context. And when they're not, does that mean that they are entheogens or sacraments? I don't think so. But they're still psychedelics because they're manifesting the mind.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
terminology is important. You know,
I agree with you about the limitations of the term entheogens, Dennis. It was a sort of a ad hoc, so to speak, not exactly ad hoc, but the guys that came up with it at 30 or 40 years ago were reacting to the fact that the word psychedelics had been so overused and corrupted at that time. It was their attempt to put it back on a better sense. But I think perhaps the term psychedelics has come far enough from the 60s and 70s that it doesn't have the same baggage anymore, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at something like kava, for example, which is certainly not a psychedelic, but in the context in which it's used, you could say it's an entheogen, because it's used in a religious context. So terminology is important, but as you say, Stephen, we can get hung up in terminology, and that's not productive either. We just have to be careful. I mean, I have tended in later years to use a strict definition of psychedelics as kind of as a trope, by saying psychedelics under my strict reductionist pharmacological perspective is it's got to be a 5-HT2A agonist. That's the common mechanism that ties all these what's sometimes called the classical psychedelics together: DMT, LSD, psilocybin, all of these things. They're serotonin 2A agonists. So, but that's like a very strict definition. But I sometimes like to define them that way. I think in some correspondence with Tom Lane, he objected to me calling MDMA a psychedelic, and he was right. Because it isn't, strictly speaking, under this definition but if I said it was in some lecture or something, then I made a mistake. But it's certainly it's a psychedelic in that it's mind manifesting. It's certainly not a serotonin 5-HT2A agonist. So, these terms are fluid, shall we say.
Chris Bache has been patiently standing in here on the phone, and so I want to address this question to him first, and then let others weigh in. Are you still with us, Chris?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, so there's a question here from Scott. He says, question for all. Can psychedelics save the world under a non-medical model, i.e., do we need legalization for the change that is needed in the world?
Oh, boy, a lot of ramifications to that question. We need the disciplined use of psychedelics, of course, and we need a culturally wise use of psychedelics. I think we need all the forms that are emerging. We need the therapeutic psychedelics. We also need the indigenous use of psychedelics. It goes beyond simply healing the wounds of the personal psyche, but goes into a deeper cosmic embrace. So my sense is that psychedelics will have, if we allow them, will have many roles to play in the years ahead. And with each psychedelic has its own character, its qualities, its way of impacting, and it's particularly straightforward. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very, very concise and very clear. Thank you, Chris, so much. Do any of the other folks have anything they want to say on this one?
I'll just say I agree.
You can't hear, but Chris is laughing too. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think you have to medicalize psychedelics to, in most cases. I mean, I think that psychedelic natural psychedelic medicines should be lightly regulated, if regulated at all. You know, indigenous people were able to be the stewards of psychedelic knowledge and wisdom for 10,000 years before there was an FDA around to tell them they couldn't do that. You know, I think that these medicines, now when it comes to synthetic psychedelics and using them in clinical contexts for specific purposes, therapeutic purposes, I think that's fine. That's probably not the way that most people will come to psychedelics, you know, come to it from a different direction. So, you know, I think that access to psychedelics should be as the regulation of the emphasis should not be on the regulation of the substances. The emphasis should be on the education of the people that might want to use these substances. They should approach it from a place of an informed perspective. And they should be assisted in making choices, the right choices, in terms of how to use them, when to use them, which ones to use. But they shouldn't have to labor under a framework of prohibition or these things are not available to you. You know, always it's law so far that the emphasis has been on regulation of the substances. It should be on education of the users so that they make good choices and use them basically in the most beneficial way possible, you know, and whatever context works for them. It may be a religious context. It may be a ritual context. It may be going into the wilderness by yourself and taking them, or the approach that Chris Bache has taken, which is a very individual but very thoughtfully and carefully structured way of personal use that does not involve even a social context. And I think that's fine. I mean, I have to admire his courage for doing that, but that's a perfectly legitimate way to approach the use of these substances. You know, at the end of the day, the important dynamic is the interaction between you and the material and the substance. You have to structure the set and setting to make that possible. But at the end of the day, it's a very personal interaction, you know.
Belinda, any closing thoughts before we say our goodbyes?
I think I would agree with many of the points that Dennis had mentioned. From my point of perspective is that, you know, Indigenous people have been the stewards and used these medicines for as long as we have all been alive. And they will continue to use them whether they're legalized or not in a ceremonial context from which they came from and their origins. So that's kind of the point that I wanted to make.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I just want to hold the book up again. This wonderful panel discussion. The book is titled How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, Visionary and Indigenous Voices Speak Out. It was edited by one of our guests today, Stephen Gray. We're also joined by Belinda
Eriacho.
Eriacho.
So you don't say the I, Eriacho?
Yeah, the I is silent.
Oh, I didn't know that. I introduced you by Eriacho at the conference.
That's all right.
It seems like you're a little bit used to it.
I am. Thank you.
Also joined by Dr. Dennis McKenna and Chris Bache. Chris, I'll just let you say a little goodbye on the phone here since we can't see you.
I really have enjoyed our conversation today, folks. It's always a pleasure to get together with you. Dennis, I really appreciated the wisdom behind many of the things, especially you said, in terms of the phenomenology of deep experience and living with deep experiences. Just a wonderful goodbye to everybody, and it's been an honor.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah.
And thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Belinda. And thanks to our wonderful Banyan community as usual. So long, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. And I'm your host, Ross McKenna. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.